Welcome back to the Enter the System series. In this installment, we're going to be looking at the triangle stranglehold, one of the absolute most efficient and powerful of the submission systems that I teach. I teach 6 primary submission systems to my students, and the triangle is absolutely one of the most important of them all. I put a very, very heavy emphasis on triangle training at all levels among my students. Why? Well, undeniably, the triangle is among the most effective of submission holds in modern day competition, both mixed martial arts and grappling, both with and without a gi. It is very clear that the triangle is amongst the most versatile of all these submission holds that we use. It can be used in a tremendous number of different scenarios. It works equally well in both grappling and fighting, with and without a gi. It works well across all weight categories. This versatility is one of its primary appeals. In addition, as a general rule, I favor strangleholds over joint locks. In extreme situations, some athletes will be prepared to take extensive damage to their joints and continue fighting. However, in the case of strangleholds, no amount of courage or mental toughness will get you past the simple fact of strangulation inducing unconsciousness. So in a choice between a stranglehold and a joint lock, I generally favor going in the direction of strangleholds. There is a third element as to why I put such a heavy emphasis on triangle training among my students, and this has to do with their skill development. Triangles require us to develop an extraordinary degree of leg dexterity and coordination, much more so than the regular submission holds. These attributes of leg dexterity and coordination have a tremendous beneficial carryover effect into other areas of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is primarily a sport which involves using our legs to wrestle an opponent's upper body whenever possible. And the triangle is the quintessential example of this in operation. Every triangle is essentially the fight of my legs and hips against one of my opponent's arms and his head and shoulders. In this way, where I get to match my lower body strength against my opponent's upper body strength, I now have an excellent chance of overcoming bigger and stronger opponents. The triangle is among the best weapons for smaller, weaker athletes to take on and defeat more powerfully built adversaries. It's important to understand that, like all my approaches to submission holds, the triangle, as I use it and teach it, is bound up in a systematic approach. The triangle system that I advocate is a fairly simple 4-step system. It involves 2 main phases within that 4-step system. Step number 1 is always to create the critical 1 in, 1 out scenario that makes all triangles possible. The 1 in, 1 out refers to the idea that in any triangle, regardless of type, I must take one of my opponent's arms and his head and trap it within my legs, and at the same time force the other arm outside of my legs. So you always look to create these situations where one of your opponent's arms is trapped inside your legs and the other is held out outside of your legs. All triangles have this in common. The means by which we create this critical 1 in, 1 out scenario is mostly bound up with grip and kazushi, the art of off-balancing. This takes us immediately to step number 2 of the triangle system. This is where we shoot our legs into a trap triangle. Once we've created a scenario where we've got the 1 in, 1 out scenario accomplished, then it's all about the shot of our legs into the trap triangle. A trap triangle represents the first phase of the application of the triangle. This is the control phase, where we lock up our opponent's head and one arm and start holding their body in a way we will set up the next stages. There are 2 main methods to achieve the trap triangle. These are foot penetration methods, which usually occur when there is a longer distance between myself and my opponent, and knee penetration methods, which usually occur when the distance between myself and my opponent is somewhat closer. If you're going to call yourself a master of triangles, you must be highly competent in both. The idea behind a trap triangle is that we don't really have a true triangle at all. Rather, what we have is our feet crossed behind our opponent's back with the head and the arm trapped. So you have the most important element of a triangle, the head and the arm trapped and the other arm isolated away, but you don't yet have your legs locked in the full figure of four. Rather, you just have your ankles crossed behind his back. This represents the first phase of our triangle attack. Step number 3 of the triangle system is always to manage the adjustment from the trap triangle all the way through to a figure 4 triangle. This represents the second phase of triangle application, the so-called strangulation phase. The trap triangle will not strangle your opponent. It's only the transition to the figure 4 triangle, the complete triangle, which makes this possible. Many will be the time that the system gets completed at this stage. If the triangle should prove to be successful, congratulations, the match is now over. However, there will be a significant number of times when you will be unable to complete the strangulation phase. If this should occur, then we go into step 4 of the triangle system. If the triangle should prove inadequate for whatever reason, then we make a switch into joint locks. You have two choices. You can go after your opponent's arms. The most popular choices are Juji Gatami, straight arm locks, and Kimura variations. In addition, you can go down to the lower body, particularly if your opponent is standing and posturing up away from your triangle, which is a common form of defense. In these situations, we make a quick transition into various variations of Ashigarami, and from there we go into strong leg attacks. Bear in mind that the triangle system, which I espouse, is based around the use of 5 different forms of triangle. When most people talk about a triangle, all they really refer to is one form of triangle, the triangle from the front, usually employed from guard position and sometimes from various top positions such as mount or side control. However, a big theme of this video series will be the idea that there are in fact 5 separate forms of the triangle stranglehold. And if you're going to call yourself a master of this system, you must become highly competent in all 5. It's important to understand that of the 5 triangles, they are arranged in a hierarchy of importance, and they are divided into 2 categories, which are termed Category A and Category B. Let's look at Category A first, as these comprise the most important of the various triangles that we study and practice. Category A has as its most important element the front triangle. There is no question that even though I teach 5 triangles, the front triangle is the king of the 5. More people get finished by front triangles than probably all of the other triangles put together. And so the lion's share of our development and training is put into the front triangle. This we often refer to as Omote Senkaku. Senkaku just means triangle, and Omote from the front. The second most important triangle that we use is the rear triangle, or Ushiro Senkaku. This is a very important form of triangle whenever we've gotten behind people and we're looking to strangle. Very often, strangles with the arms prove to be difficult, and a quick switch to strangulations with the legs often gets great effect. In Category A, the third triangle, in my opinion, the third most important in the system overall, is the opposite-sided triangle, where we lock our triangles in what appears to be the wrong way, or an unconventional method. This is Hantai Senkaku, and it forms an excellent way of supplementing front triangle attacks which have been thwarted by our opponent's posture. We now come to Category B. Of the Category B triangles, we have the side triangle, Yoko Senkaku. This is very often seen in the sport of judo, but is relatively rare in the sport of jiu-jitsu. This can be a very, very valuable addition to your triangle arsenal, and we'll be pushing this move very heavily in this video series. The least important statistically of the various triangles that we use. The one which we get the fewest results from, but still a very important part of the system and one which you must become familiar with, is the reverse triangle, or Gyaku Senkaku. Let's understand something. These triangles, all 5, are divided into categories A and B for a very distinct reason. Within each category, whenever you have one of these triangles, you will always have the other as a possible follow-up attack. Within category A, if I ever have a front triangle, if I maneuver my body around my opponent's body, I will always have opportunities to make a switch to a rear triangle or an opposite-sided triangle. Within category B, if I ever have a side triangle, just by moving my body around my opponent's body, I will always have the opportunity to switch to a reverse triangle and vice versa. So understand this. Within a category, if I have one triangle, just by moving my body around my opponent, I will always have the other triangles in that category. Keep this in mind whenever you're employing your triangle training and practice. You will soon start to double or even triple the number of combination triangle attacks that you employ upon your training partners and opponents. This is a very, very important insight and will be heavily featured in this video series. Now it's time for us to look at the central problems of the triangle system. I'm sure you're aware by this time that a big part of my teaching methodology is to identify what are the central problems that we face whenever we go into the main moves that we teach. The first problem with triangles is always going to be the circumference problem. That is, how can I enclose my opponent's shoulders, head, and arm inside the length of my legs? It's never an easy thing, especially if your opponent is powerfully built through the shoulders, to lock up those 3 disparate elements, the head, shoulder, and arm, inside your legs, particularly if you feel you're at a height disadvantage. The answer that we'll be advocating in this video is the shoulder elimination problem. As a general rule, what we want to do is to eliminate our opponent's shoulder from being locked inside of our triangle, and instead focus only upon our opponent's neck and arm. By reducing the content of my opponent's body inside the triangle, we can apply successful triangles in many cases where previously it may have been impossible. The second big problem we face whenever we go to apply triangles, especially the case of front triangles, the most important of the triangles, is the posture problem. How can I prevent my opponent from posturing up and out of my trap triangle when I'm in phase 1 and trying to move towards phase 2 to strangle my opponent? The 3 main methods we'll be using in this video are the knee pull method, the head pull method, and the shin pull method. All 3 are effective methods of preventing our opponent posturing up and away from a trap triangle and preventing us progressing into the figure 4 to complete a stranglehold. The third big problem we face is the stacking problem. How can I prevent my opponent pressuring me with a heavy stack as I attempt to strangle in the figure 4 position? The general method we'll be using in this video series is to scoop grip inside our opponent's leg and work our way to an advantageous angle out to the side. This will simultaneously overcome stacking problems and lifting problems if your opponent is trying to pick you up off the floor. Now, as always, there are a range of general principles that determine the character of the system overall. The first and most important principle of the triangle system is what I often refer to as the multiplicity principle. When most people talk about a triangle, they really only refer to one triangle, and that is the front triangle. Undeniably, the front triangle is statistically the most important of the various triangles that are used in the sport of jiu-jitsu. However, don't let this blind you to the fact that the other 4 triangles, which we'll cover in this video, play an extremely important role. You cannot maximize your effectiveness with triangle work in general by focusing on only one triangle out of the possible 5. If you wish to maximize your effectiveness with triangle attacks and maximize your application across a broad range of scenarios, you must pay heed to the multiplicity principle and use all 5 triangles. Also, you must understand that once you start to use the triangles together in unison and understand the difference between category A and category B triangles, whenever one of your triangles fails, you'll be able to move on to another. Understanding how to use the 5 triangles as a team rather than relying on the most well-known triangle will greatly increase your effectiveness with the move. The second big principle of this triangle system is the 2 phases principle. Most people just teach the triangle as a move in itself. What we try very hard to emphasize is breaking triangles down into 2 distinct phases. The first phase is the trap triangle phase, where I simply cross my ankles around my opponent's back, trapping the head and the arm. If you look in top-level competition, you will almost always see a regular pattern. Triangles are almost never born fully grown. Rather, they begin as a trap triangle, and over time, the athletes adjust to the figure 4 triangle. The figure 4 triangle is the one which actually strangles your opponent, but it's the trap triangle which is used to first enter and control your opponent. Then there's going to be a period of adjustment where you work your way towards the full figure of 4 and actually strangle someone. By breaking triangles down into 2 distinct phases and understanding exactly what you need to do in both phases and how to get the 2 phases to work together, you will find you become far more effective with your triangle attacks. The third big principle in this triangle system which I teach is the shoulder elimination principle. Too many athletes struggle with triangles because they try to surround too much of their opponent's body when they go to strangle. You will greatly increase your effectiveness with triangle strangulations if you actively look to eliminate your opponent's shoulder from inside the lock of your triangle. This will take away many of the problems commonly associated with triangles in terms of height difference, etc., etc. A fourth critical principle is the division principle. You must learn to divide the various triangles into 2 distinct categories, category A and category B. Understand this: the triangles within each category are closely related to each other, but you cannot jump across categories. I cannot go from a triangle of category A and then switch immediately into category B. The leg configurations simply won't allow that to happen. So if I have a front triangle, I cannot simply unlock it and quickly go into a side triangle. My legs are simply in the wrong position. However, within a category, I can do this. So for example, I can easily go from a front triangle, a mote senkaku, to an opposite-sided triangle, hantai senkaku. Understanding how we divide the triangles up will make your ability to use them in combination much, much better. The fifth critical principle of the triangle system is the arm isolation principle. You must understand that the setup to every triangle shares something in common. You have to create what we call the one in, one out situation, where one of your opponent's arms gets trapped inside your legs and one of his arms gets trapped outside of your legs. Once you see this as the precursor to every single triangle that you will ever attempt, it becomes a mental image in your mind, and mentally you start to see the possibilities for triangles much more than you did previously. I often coach my students to actively look for the one in, one out possibility as they grapple with their opponents. Once you make this mental association with your opponent's arm position and your legs, the number of triangles you will attempt in a given match will go up dramatically. The sixth main principle of the triangle system is the primacy principle. I put strangles as more valuable as a general rule, not always, but as a general rule, over joint locks. In other words, strangles have primacy over joint locks. Now the great news with triangle attacks is you can attempt both joint locks and strangles at the same time. That's the very nature of triangles, and it's one of their greatest and strongest features. However, whenever you go to attack with triangles, I always coach my athletes, attack the strangle first. Make an honest attempt at strangling your opponent every single time. Don't switch off to a joint lock unless you distinctly and honestly feel that the stranglehold is not there. Work with strangles as the primary element in the Sankaku attacks. Even though both are possible, look heavily to favor one. Let's talk about the major themes of this video and the major lessons that I want you to absorb. You're going to see 4 critical themes that run throughout everything that I teach. The first of these very, very important themes is that of multiplicity of triangles. The principle of multiplicity is often referred to it. If you look at the sport of jiu-jitsu to this day, the triangle strangle plays a major role in the most successful submissions in the sport. It's a high-performing move. But it's my contention that the current generation of jiu-jitsu athletes, as successful as they've been with a triangle, could be much more successful if they took a deeper look at the triangle stranglehold as a whole. Currently, when people talk about the triangle choke, what they usually mean is the front triangle. Let's get something straight. There are 5 different kinds of triangle. As long as you limit yourself to one, the front triangle, you're limiting your options. Just as no builder would go in to perform a complex task of carpentry with one tool, so no good strangle expert would go in with one tool when he had 5 available. A big part of this video is going to be the attempt to encourage you to go beyond the front triangle. Don't get me wrong, in my opinion, the front triangle is the king of triangles. There's 5 that I teach. There's 5 out there which are readily available to you. Of them all, unquestionably, the most successful in modern day competition is the front triangle, and the majority of our time in this video will be spent on the front triangle. But you must incorporate the other 4. It is my belief, and I believe the work of my students backs me up on this, that if jiu-jitsu athletes worked with the image of 5 different triangles and used all 5 in unison as a team, they would make this already very successful submission hold much more successful than it currently is. A huge part of what we're going to work over in this instructional video is the interface between these 5 different forms of triangle, how they relate to each other, and how expanding our notion of what is a triangle stranglehold, we can greatly increase our performance with this incredible move. A second critical theme which will run throughout this video is the idea of a 2-stage approach to the triangle. Ultimately, what I'm going to teach you in this video is a 4-step system, but there's no question that within that 4-step system, there's one particular phase which you will see me coming back to time and time again, and which is going to be a huge determinant in how good you become in applying the triangle stranglehold in the various sparring and competition settings in which you find yourself. Almost in every case, triangles begin with what we're going to be calling a trap triangle. This is where my feet or ankles are crossed and I do not yet have a fully formed figure 4 lock with my triangle. At this point, it is simply a lock around your opponent's arm and head with 2 of your legs. From there, in the vast majority of cases, we make a transition to the figure 4 triangle, where you are actually strangling your opponent. It is almost never the case that you start in a fully locked in figure 4 triangle. In the overwhelming majority of cases, you will start with a trap triangle and you will have to transition against resistance. Your opponent feels a threat after all, to the figure 4 triangle, which actually strangles your opponent. Managing this transition from trap triangle on the one hand to figure 4 triangle on the other. The first is a method of entering into the triangle situation, and the second is a means of actually finishing your opponent. Managing that transition is a huge, huge part of what will determine whether you succeed or fail with your triangles. A huge part of this video that we are going over now will involve managing this transition. I'm sure by this stage you've learned from watching videos or hearing me talk that I put an extraordinary amount of emphasis on good biomechanics in the application of submission holds. There's nothing more tragic than getting close to a submission hold and then watching it run away because of bad mechanics. You did all the wonderful work of setups, entry, controlling your opponent against resistance, but then when finally it came time to actually finish your opponent and make them tap, the mechanics just weren't there. It's my belief that almost all of the common problems associated with applying triangle strangleholds in competition and sparring can be overcome with a good understanding of mechanics. A big part of this video will be spent in just understanding what are the precise mechanics needed to overcome resistance in the case of all 5 of the triangles that we use. In addition to increasing your percentage rate, there's a real intention here on my part. One of the most common problems which I face as a coach is convincing people that their body can perform triangles. There's a widespread belief that triangles are limited to people with long, thin legs, and that short-legged people will never have a triangle that's noteworthy. In this video, I'm hoping to change your mind about that. And if our mechanics are well set and well understood, even short-legged people can have a formidable triangle strangle, which your opponents will respect and fear. A large part of what we think are body types determining how successful triangle strangleholds are really has much more to do with mechanics. That's not to say that body type doesn't play a role. Body type always plays a role in every technique in jiu-jitsu. Triangle is no exception. But don't sell yourself short. Short-legged people can be highly effective with the triangle stranglehold. A large part of what determines whether they are or not is going to come down to the mechanics that we spend a lot of time on in this video. A fourth crucial theme, which will run throughout this video, pertains to mindset. Obviously, most of the factors that determine whether you succeed or fail with a triangle are going to be physical factors. But there's also some crucial mental ones as well. Perhaps the most important pertains to the idea of opportunity. I always say to my students, if you can't see an opportunity, you'll never take the physical action required to actually make it happen. Everything begins with vision, of seeing the opportunity. Only when the opportunity is seen can the physical actions take place, which will actually produce the results that you seek. In the case of the triangle, you have to train your mind to see the possibility of creating what we call the one in, one out scenario. Ultimately, every triangle is the same story. It's the story of creating a situation where one of your opponent's arms gets caught inside your legs and one of your opponent's arms gets caught outside your legs. Whether or not you become highly successful with the triangle is largely going to come down to your ability to see the opportunities to create that one in, one out scenario in a wide variety of situations. Training your mind to see these opportunities is going to be a big theme that we push throughout this video series. It's time to begin our journey into training the triangle stranglehold and the system which I teach built around that extraordinary submission method. More than any other of the major submission holds in the sport of jiu-jitsu, the triangle is going to require dexterity and coordination on your part, which very few of the others do. If you look at the main submission holds of the sport, something like a rear naked strangle, for example, or a guillotine, the movements are fairly easy, even for someone who's a complete beginner to complete. It's not a difficult thing to coach any mildly coordinated athletic person to apply a guillotine strangle, a rear-naked strangle, or what have you. But you ask those same people to lock up a triangle and things become problematic. When it's time to actually apply the precise stranglehold, there's a considerable amount of skill required in terms of body dexterity just to get into the triangle in the first place, and alignment to actually finish the stranglehold. And so most people, I believe it's fair to say, have to be coached a little bit longer and a little bit harder before they actually get to apply a stranglehold with their legs than they would, say, with their arms. We talked about this earlier in the introduction, the idea that most people are massively more coordinated with their upper body than their lower body. And there's obvious reasons for this. We spend our whole lives doing intricate tasks with our hands. You can dial a phone, play a piano, play a guitar, what have you. But if I asked you to do those same activities with your feet, you'd be in serious trouble. Typically, we go through our whole lives using our feet and our legs pretty much for walking and running. These are much less coordinated activities than, say, for example, playing a piano with your hands. So there's a big asymmetry between the coordination of our lower body and our upper body. Typically, for most human beings, the hands and arms are used for high coordination tasks, and the legs are used for lower coordination tasks like walking and running. So if we're going to learn to gain expertise in the triangle stranglehold, a large part of what we do is gaining expertise in the movements of our lower body. So you're going to have to, as it were, make special demands upon yourself to gain coordination and dexterity with your legs. Now, the interesting question is, how much of a role does my body play in my ability to be successful with the triangle strangle? It's my contention that many more people could be employing this move successfully than are currently, if they just knew a little bit more. Let's start with the more basic question. What kinds of minimal demands are required of me as an athlete to be able to at least get my foot in the door with triangle strangleholds? Well, let's list them right now. There's 4, and all of them are pretty damn easy to work with. First, you've got to have coordination with your ability to move your feet. Your feet have to be able to go to a precise part of your opponent's upper body in order to enter into the triangle as a stranglehold. The second thing you're going to be required is the ability to flare your knees against each other. Okay, not much, nothing crazy. You're not asking you for any kind of extraordinary flexibility here, but I should be able to sit with one foot directly in front of the other and bring my 2 knees without touching with my hands down towards the floor. That's asking very little of you. Most of you watching this video, I'm sure, could do this quite easily. And I should, at the same time, be able to bring my body forward so that my elbows touch the mat. That's the minimum requirement, okay? Because most triangle strangles will involve the flaring of one of your knees at a time, okay? Here we're using 2, but when it's actually applied, it'll be 1. And my body should be able to curve towards my opponent, okay? So the minimal flexibility requirement to be able to employ triangles is this ability to take our knees down towards the floor without forcing them with our hands and put our elbows down on the mat. That's the minimum requirement. And I'm prepared to bet a large sum of money that the overwhelming majority of you watching this video can already do that just fine. Okay, so it's not asking a lot from you. If you currently can't do this, then just a small amount of time every day spent on this very easy, relaxing stretch, and you'll soon be able to do it. Okay. In the case of some of you, perhaps those who are built very generously through the stomach find it difficult to push forward. I'm going to come back and talk about this later. As a general rule, one of the great inhibitors of your ability to perform a triangle successfully is not, as most people believe, your leg length. That does play a role, but it's not the number one inhibitor. The number one inhibitor is usually your waist size. As a general rule, if you want to be successful with triangles, you should have an appropriately thin waist. If your own stomach gets in the way as you try to come down and touch your elbows on the floor, that's definitely going to hinder your progress in your triangle training, and you'll have to modify your diet or what have you. Remember, you can't change the length of your legs, but you can all change the size of your waist. That's a pretty easy thing to do. So if you want to become a master of triangle strangles, that's something you should bear in mind. Triangles are very difficult to apply when you're generously built through the stomach. So it's important to be able to slim your waist down if you wish to be successful. So what have we got at this point? We know now that foot dexterity is our first prerequisite. I'll come back to that very soon. The second prerequisite is that we should be able to touch our knees down to the floor without hands, and we should be able to touch our elbows to the mat at the same time. Incredibly simple, and as I said, I'm sure over 90% if you could do that right now without a warm-up. The next thing that we need to be able to do, you got to be able to bring knees to chest. Okay, this is also a very, very simple kind of movement, but if I have a hard time bringing knees up to my own armpits, that's going to hinder my ability to work successfully with most forms of triangle, especially those from bottom position. Okay, so I should have foot dexterity, I should have forward mobility, and I should have an ability to always bring my knees up to my armpits. The fourth critical element is your ability to come up onto the points of your shoulders and fold your body over itself. A fairly simple action. So I should, at any given time, be able to come up and over onto the points of my shoulders and move from one side to the other. This simple physical action is required in almost all successful triangles from bottom position. You should be able to come up so your lower back is off the ground in a relaxed state, inverting your body, and come up to close your legs. So you see the minimum requirements for the application of most triangles are very, very minor. They're simple. They're easy things for you to train. None of these could be considered an advanced stretch. As I said, I'm sure the overwhelming majority of you could do them right now without a warm-up. We're going to go over some basic drills now for the development of these four features. The idea that we should have dexterity with our foot placement. I should be able to move my feet with the same kind of coordination that I move my hands in time. I should be able to flare my knees apart and fold my body forwards. At the same time, I should have an ability to bring my knees high up towards my armpit on both sides. I should also have this ability to fold my body over so that I can come up onto the points of my shoulders with my lower back well off the ground into a kind of inverted position. If you can perform those four simple movements, then you're ready to start your triangle work. Let's talk about some simple solo drills that we can do to increase the ability of your body to move into triangles. There's a saying which I often use to my students: movement before moves. Your ability to learn any given move is directly proportional to your ability to move your body in ways required to perform that move. Okay, if I'm teaching you a kick that requires you to do a full split before the kick can even be accomplished, it's no good me teaching you that kick if you can't perform a full split. You would have to start with that skill first. The good news is that in most grappling situations, the physical requirements are very low. So as we saw with the minimum requirements for a triangle, most people can do that pretty easily from day one. Nonetheless, let's go over some very, very simple drills now, which will make it easier for beginning athletes to get into triangles and shorten the time required to actually learn the moves that we'll be looking at later in this video. The first thing we need to be able to do is to develop the ability to move our feet, which later on in the video we'll be looking at, will enable us to enter into the triangle. Okay, I should be able to move my feet in similar ways that I can move my hands in any given way that I wish to go. I should be able to move my feet in two different directions in circular motions. This movement is often referred to as pommeling. Pommeling is just this repetitious movement where my feet move in circles so that if I were required to pommel a foot into a small space, I could easily do so with either foot in either direction. This is going to make it very easy for me to take advantage of failures in my opponent's arm position to go in and secure triangle strangles. Now, when you first start off this movement, I recommend you start in a supine position, okay, flat on your back. That takes all the weight off your legs and makes for a relaxed abdomen. You can hear my voice is very relaxed as I engage in light pommeling motions. This is also an excellent warm-up before class, and one I recommend you do if you're on a daily basis, if you're going to call yourself a master of triangles. Now, once you get familiar with the idea of working your pommeling from a supine position, then it's time for you to get slightly more advanced. I want you to begin applying pommeling from a seated position. This engages your core muscles and makes the movement slightly more difficult. We're going to put two hands on the floor, just like so, and in the seated position, we're going to start working that same pommeling motion. This means that my knees have to come up higher towards my shoulders and creates a slightly more difficult way of performing the same move. My legs both move in circles, just like so. This becomes important for some of the setups that we'll be looking at later on in this video. As you gain an expertise, you go to the next level of pommeling, which is to take your hands off the mat. Now your body is simply supported in air like so. So now only your core is supporting your legs as you go through the various pommeling movements. This requires slightly more coordination and slightly more core strength than the earlier methods of pommeling, and will be useful when it's time for you to go into triangles. The fourth and last of the various solo pommeling drills involves me coming up into a position like so, propped up on my elbows. And from here, we engage in the same pommeling motion in a vertical position. Because we're vertical, it requires a little more coordination on your part. Because you're up on your shoulders, you're replicating some of the positions that will be required when you actually engage in live training and sparring with your opponents. When you learn to move your feet dexterously and with confidence in opposing directions at the same time, you'll soon develop an ability to swim your feet, even on a resisting opponent, when the opportunity presents itself, and pommel your feet into good attacking positions where you can achieve the crucial one-in, one-out position that forms a big part of whether you succeed or fail with the triangle strangle. We're looking at some very simple methods of warming the body up and preparing you for the various body movements that will be required to excel in the various forms of triangle. We just looked at pommeling with our feet. Now, let's look at the next critical skill which you must master with your body to facilitate your learning of the various triangles that we look at throughout this video. This is the skill of folding our body over. Almost every triangle involves situations where my body folds forwards so that there's a hollowing in my body, like so. There are almost no situations where you apply a stranglehold with the legs, a triangle, with your body in an arched position. It's almost always some kind of hollowed out body shape. And so learning to master this ability to fold your body over and over itself so that your knees come up towards your armpits is a critical part of whether you become a master of triangles or not. You must develop this ability to fold the body over so your knees come up comfortably towards your shoulders, and this is the exact body position you'll be employing for most of your triangles, especially those from the bottom position. So let's start off with our body folding drills. When we first start off, the best drill is simply one where I just learn to touch my toes over my shoulder. So I just come up like so and touch toes. Then I just walk across to the other side. As I walk from one side to the other, I look in the direction that I'm going. And in this way, as my toes skim over the mat, I keep myself in a situation where my knees are very close to my own shoulders. And then we recover to a turtle position. Once we get comfortable with this gentle motion. We go to the next one, which again encourages the athlete to take knees up to shoulders, but with straightened legs this time. We start down on the floor, just like so. Our body goes into a hollow, like so. And then from here, we focus on bringing our legs over and touching the floor so that we fold out like this. From here, it's an easy thing for us to come up and start to apply the lock of a triangle, locking on both sides. We come back down. Everything is about this folding of the body directly overhead. And from here, we sit on up. Now, the last of the folding drills, which I often encourage my students to employ as a warm-up before class, just involves a switching of direction as we fold our body over. I put my arms out in a crucifix position, and from here, I bring my legs up, touch, and we slide across the mat. Now, we go back in the opposite direction. So I come up and I look to my right. My head goes through like so. Now I look to my left. And in this fashion, we learn to fold our body comfortably over on itself so that knees are coming up to chest. We're getting used to the idea of inverted position. We're getting used to the idea of our weight being supported on our two shoulders. And we're developing the core strength required to bring knees to chest, which will ultimately be the reason why we succeed with triangles from bottom position. Okay, we just looked at some very simple solo drills that we can employ to increase the 4 things that we need to be effective with triangle strangleholds: our foot dexterity, our ability to flare our knees apart from each other, our ability to bring our knees to our chest, and then the ability to fold our body over and get our shoulders up off the mat. Let's look now at some partner drills, which are very, very useful. Again, something you can do every day before class, just as a way to get your body moving in ways that will increase your success with triangles. Now, the great advantage of bringing in a partner to do your drills is for the first time you can start to train the single most important thing when it's time to enter into your triangles, which is to create the 1 in, 1 out position. Okay. Always remember, guys, that there's a sense in which every triangle, no matter what the type, is really the telling of the same story. And that story, the first chapter, is always this: my ability to create a situation where one of my training partner's arms gets caught inside my legs and one of my opponent's arms gets caught outside my legs. So there's a sense in which we're always trying to create a 1 in, 1 out situation where one of Mateus's arms is caught between my legs and one of his arms is kept shut out from outside my legs. Okay? Every triangle, regardless of type, begins in this fashion: the 1 in, 1 out situation. Once we start employing partner drills, you can train yourself to consistently hit this situation, 1 in, 1 out, on demand in a wide variety of possible scenarios when you're grappling down the mat. Let's look now at my absolute favorite method of training beginning students who are interested in developing their potential with the triangle to develop the dexterity required to create the 1 in, 1 out position. This is the no hands drill. We're going to start off with the training partner in a closed guard. Mateus is going to put his hands on my biceps, just like so. His shoulders will be up and the arms relatively extended, just ever so slightly bent. Okay? We're going to start by flaring our elbows so that we create space for my knees to move inside. I don't want Mateus's elbows down here by my hips. Okay, that's going to ruin the drill. We need a little bit of space to move our hips, so we're going to start by flaring our elbows out. Now from here, we're going to have the confidence to open up our guard and start turning our body out to one side. I can augment that by coming out with my foot on the floor or putting my foot on my training partner's hip. Okay, so if my hips come out to my left-hand side, like so, I'm going to use my right foot to pommel without hands inside and over Mateus's shoulder so that we can go in and begin to lock up a triangle. Okay, once we make an initial lock, we just come back and we thread our foot through. And we just go side to side. So his hands will never leave my biceps. I'll come through on a given side and I will learn to pommel my foot through and around and lock up a basic triangle. From here, we come back and he puts hands on biceps. And we just go from one side across to the other, always learning to pommel in and lock up the figure of 4. Every time we come through, we just form that inverted knee, which makes it easy for me to thread my foot around the corner and lock up a basic triangle. The key element involved is this idea of my hips going offline and my knee pointing down to the mat. It's that which enables me to get through and employ the movement. So you'll see I start off lined up with my training partner, my foot on the hip, creates misalignment, and my knee and toes point down at the mat. It's that which makes it easy for me to bring my foot through, around, and lock the figure of 4. If I make the mistake of pointing my knee at the ceiling, you'll see that even if I bring my hips out, I can't get my knee through. What's required is that my knee point down to the floor. It's that which enables me to bring knee to chest, kick over the top, and lock the figure of 4. When we work in repetitions from side to side, we'll go anywhere from 20 to 50 repetitions. This will train your body to get offline, invert the knee, bring knee to chest, and kick your foot over to get to the precious 1 in, 1 out position, which will enable you to work effectively with triangles from bottom position in ways that will work well in competition. Now we're looking at some simple partner drills, which is going to hopefully help our performance of the various moves we're going to be looking at throughout this video. We're coaching the idea that ultimately we're going to have to be able to get our knees up to our chest and our body into a hollowed out shape so we can be successful with triangles from bottom position. It's very, very important you get used to the idea of working on the points of your shoulders. I should be able to come up comfortably on my shoulders to work the various triangle attacks, which we'll be doing from bottom position. Okay, a drill which I often like to see my students perform before class as a warm-up, and is a great way for you to start your introduction to body movement for triangles, is a spinning inversion drill, where we start off, our training partner is going to be kneeling behind us, and we're just going to grab wrists just like so. Okay, from here we're going to come up so we have our shoulders, our weight is on our shoulders, and our body is inverted with knees to chest. All the essential prerequisites required to go into the various triangles that we look at. Now, we're going to take our feet into our training partner's armpit. My right foot is going to bring my left foot across so that my heel locks into his armpit. Don't be here with the sole of your foot. You want to penetrate with the heel so that my heel forms a hook to my training partner. Now, Mateus makes his body strong and resistant. I don't want to pull him forward with my leg. And I just want to practice the skill of rotating around the corner and throwing my leg over Mateus's shoulder. Once we make that catch on the shoulder in this position, I release his second hand and I come through into a position where I can start the action of turning off the shoulders and going into the various moves that we like. Once again, the turning and rotation drill. We start off with a kneeling training partner behind us and we lock wrists just like so. Now, from here, first, body posture. I fold up on myself and bring knees to chest. Okay? From knees to chest, my body should be relatively weightless and I should be able to move freely on my two shoulders. Initially, we form a catch on our training partner in the inverted position, and then my right foot feeds my left foot to the armpit. And as a result, I can bring my body around the corner. I pull my knee up to his armpit, so we're hooked in place, and my second leg goes over the top and locks. Now I release, and I come around the corner into a perfect position to lock the figure of 4. The key elements that I want you getting used to is the idea of forming a good catch on your opponent's shoulders by making sure that the hollow of your knees comes up to the shoulders. I'll show you what I mean by performing the move poorly, and you'll see when I don't use the hollows of my knees to catch, you get an undesirable result. Starting off like so, as I bring my body up and I go across. If I just come around the corner and I just try to throw my calf muscle over the shoulder, I get a very poor connection to my opponent's head and shoulders. So when I come around the corner, you're scrambling now to apply a triangle. Okay? It's very important we make contact with our opponent's trapezius muscles with the hollow of our knees. So done properly, we come in. There's the inverted position, which enables me to move easily on my shoulders because there's very little friction with the mat in this position. I'm just on the points of my shoulders. Now I make an initial catch that locks his body to mine. I go across and I make a good hook with the Achilles tendon behind his shoulder, so that as I come around, I bring the hollow of my knee to his armpit. That creates a situation where I can bring the hollow of my second knee over his trapezius and then make the turn. As a result, we're in the perfect position to go through, lock, and there's the figure of 4. Done in this fashion, you can learn to turn in the inverted position, which we favor to enter into the triangles. You'll be learning a host of skills about balancing your body on the points of your shoulders, rotating, moving, and penetrating with the hollow of your knee to your opponent's trapezius in ways which will bear fruit when it's time to actually employ these in competition. Now, we're looking at some simple partner drills which are going to increase your performance when it comes time to apply the moves that we'll be looking at very shortly in this video. The one we're going to look at now is one of my absolute favorite drills, one which I strongly encourage my students to do on a daily basis. This is the drill of turning off the shoulder. The purpose of this drill is super important for the skills you're going to be learning later on today. This is the skill of forming an advantageous angle on your opponent as you work from bottom position. So if we have a training partner on 2 knees, we're going to start off square in front of our training partner with our legs just crossed like so. So we don't yet have a triangle in place. Okay, I'm going to take my calf muscle and put it over Mateus's shoulder, just like so. Okay, so I go from just crossed feet, no real triangle at this point, just what we call a trap triangle. And we're going to place our foot over the shoulder like so. That will become that will create an ability on my part to turn off my training partner's shoulder and get my 2 lower legs in a straight line, both pointing in the same direction. And it's that which will enable us to lock up the figure of 4 and go from a trap triangle into a figure 4 triangle. So the key element to make a strong body Mateus is from here. I initially start by placing my calf muscle over his shoulder so that I can turn without the use of my hands. Okay, now we'll be using our arms to turn later on as we get through this video, but I want you to have the skill of being able to draw an opponent forward into a triangle without the use of your hands. Okay, this is going to be very advantageous for you under combat conditions when you're sparring. So we start off with crossed feet. We bring our hips up, and then from here my calf muscle goes over my training partner's shoulder, so he locks up. We turn off the shoulder. That ability to turn and pivot and get our 2 lower legs pointing in the same direction is what's going to enable us to lock the figure of 4 and get through to an actual stranglehold. Your ability to form that advantageous angle is going to be a big part of whether you succeed or fail with your triangle attempts in competition and sparring. Let's start early with this simple drill which teaches us to turn off the shoulder without even the use of our hands. When we incorporate hands and arms later in this video, it's going to be very easy for you to turn to those advantageous angles and create strong strangleholds. Okay, we've looked at the preliminaries of getting our body moving in ways which are going to facilitate your ability to get into triangles of the type we're going to be using in this video. Now it's time to get into the heart of the matter. Now it's time to get into triangle training per se. Let's start with what I believe is the single most important theme that runs throughout this entire video series. This is the idea that currently the sport of jiu-jitsu only really emphasizes one triangle, the front triangle. In fact, if you talk to the average jiu-jitsu student around the globe and you say, show me a triangle, they just automatically assume front triangle. In fact, that's really all they understand is a triangle. My goal is to change people's perceptions about this. There are 5 triangles in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. All 5 of them are very valuable. Now, I'm the first one to tell you the front triangle is the king out of all those triangles. It will account for the vast majority of your successful submission finishes, both in competition and in training. But don't let that devalue the other 4. What I want to do now is give you a brief introduction to all 5 of the triangles, so you just know what I'm talking about. And then we will spend considerable amounts of time building an actual system around those 5 triangles. What you're going to see is that the 5 triangles, each one has a system within it, because each one has its own central problems quite different from the other triangles. Let's start with a quick look at the 5 triangles which will form the basis, the heart and soul of this video. The first one you all know, the front triangle. This we refer to among each other as Amote Senkaku. Senkaku is Japanese, just means triangle or 3 sides. Amote means from the front. So if you hear me coaching at a tournament, you'll often hear me calling for Amote Senkaku, the front triangle. Okay, a front triangle is the one you guys are all very familiar with. This is the idea of working usually from bottom, but also top position. We form an angle on our training partner. Our leg goes across and forms the figure of 4. Okay. Once we form the figure of 4 in this position, a stranglehold is enacted, and we can finish in various ways that we'll look at throughout this this video series. So this is the one most of you are very familiar with, the front triangle. Now let's go to our second one. This is I'm hoping to make this form of triangle much more popular than it currently is in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. My student Gordon Ryan had notable success with this move. We use it often with each other in the training hall. In competition, he famously strangled Harlot Gracie with this move. This is the opposite-sided triangle, or Hantai Senkaku, opposite side. And we will often make use of this move. Let's say that I have an opponent here in a trap triangle situation, and from here I take my hand around my opponent's leg and I hold on to my opponent's head, just like so. I'm going to take my legs and bring them around the corner like this until I form an angle where I'm facing almost forwards on my training partner. Now I take my leg through and form a wedge behind my training partner's head, and I grab a hold of my own foot and lock a triangle directly behind Mateus's head and neck. When I apply the stranglehold from this position, it's an enormously effective method of strangulation. I will show from a different angle what's going on here. Let's say we have a basic trap triangle situation like so. Okay. Whether my opponent puts his arm here deliberately or whether I move it there myself doesn't really matter. We get a hold of our training partner's head, we get inside our training partner's leg, and I form an angle on my training partner. I retain control of his head, so if he tries to posture up, it won't be easy. One of the key elements here is this idea of forming a satisfactory angle so that I can use my leg as a wedge in behind his head and neck. I keep my foot close to his back, so when he tries to posture up, there's a lot of resistance behind him. Now, we pull our foot up to the armpit, and we lock the figure of 4, so that when we apply the stranglehold, it comes on very quickly in this position. So this will be the second of the great triangles that we look at. Okay. Now let's look at the third in this series, a triangle that I want. I think it's fair to say at this point that people have seen my students employ this triangle on a fairly regular basis in competition. So people are starting to become more familiar with it. It's been around forever. All these triangles have. But we do put a very, very heavy emphasis on it. This is Ushiro Senkaku, the triangle from the back. We just have a training partner sitting down in front of us. Ushiro Senkaku involves Again, a triangle lock. We lock around our training partner's head and arm, like so, from the back. And one of the key elements is the idea of connection of his hand to our chest, which exposes his neck to the stranglehold. And from here, a simple pinching of my left knee towards my right creates a very strong stranglehold for a finish. Okay. My students often make use of this in competition and, of course, in training also. This forms the third of the triangles which we often employ. Now let's go to the fourth of these triangles. Just take a slide on, Matthias. From a situation where Matthias is on his back, like so, a fourth form of triangle which we often make use of is Yoko Senkaku, or the side triangle. Okay? In a side triangle, we take our body through, like so, and my 2 feet go from a crossed foot position, like so, to a figure of 4, where I bring my foot back to Matthias's armpit, and I lock my legs in the usual triangular formation, like so. We lock up a kimura on our training partner's near arm, and from this position, as I lock the figure of 4 and pull in with the legs, we create a very strong stranglehold from the side. So this would be Yoko Senkaku. Okay? This stands in contrast to the last of the 5 triangles, which will form a big part of our work here today. This is Gyaku Senkaku, or the reverse triangle. I'll just show one common sense example of this. From a situation where I've scissored around my training partner's near arm, I could pass my foot over my training partner's head and bring my foot all the way through underneath his neck, like so. From here, I can lock up the figure of 4 with my legs and go through into a catch position, just like so. Now from here, as I squeeze the legs, we get an enormously tight stranglehold for the finish. Okay? Thank you. So there we have it. 5 triangles. One of them, the first, a Mote Senkaku, or the front triangle, you're all very familiar with. Then we saw the idea of the Hantai Senkaku, or the opposite-sided triangle, where I lock my legs in what appears to be the wrong way, but still get enormously good results if we get our body into the correct position. We looked at Ushiro Senkaku, the triangle that we use from the back. And then Yoko Senkaku, triangle from the side. And finally, we finished off with Gyaku Senkaku, the reverse triangle. All of them have the same common features. You lock up your opponent's head and one arm, and you strangle him with a combination of your hamstring muscle and his own shoulder. All of them employ the idea of the one in, one out situation, where my opponent's head and arm are caught inside my legs and one of his arms is caught outside the legs. Now, here's where things get interesting. There are 2 categories that these triangles fall into. I'll use the term category A. Category A comprises the front triangle, the rear triangle, and the opposite triangle, Hantai Senkaku. Anytime I have one of those 3 triangles, I always have the other 2. That's a very, very important concept. Anytime I have one of those 3 triangles, I always have the other 2. All that's required is that I shift around my opponent's body, changing the angle, and I can go from one triangle to the other. Then we go to category B, the Yoko Senkaku, the side triangle, and the Gyaku Senkaku, the reverse triangle. If I ever have one, I always have the other. So I can cycle between those 2 and use them in combination. So I have category A on one hand and category B on the other, and those triangles in each category are strongly linked to each other, so that I can use them in combinations to create enormously strong triangle threats over time and follow my opponent through resistance and get through to a stranglehold and a win. Learning to put those 5 triangles into their 2 respective categories is a big step, and learning how to combine them together in ways that will break through tough opposition. We'll be looking a lot at how this occurs throughout this video. Now, I want to talk to you about a crucial theme of your triangle training. This is the idea of rotating around your opponent's head and shoulder. Always remember, a triangle is always the same thing. It's my 2 legs wrapped around your head and shoulder. That's where the stranglehold comes from. When we spoke briefly about triangles and introduced the 5 triangles in the earlier segment, you will remember that I spoke about category A and category B. There are 3 triangles which are absolutely locked together by their very nature. And whenever you have one, you always have the other 2. That's category A. Then you have category B of linked triangles. And those 2 are linked together. Whenever you have one, you always have the other. Let's look at this now in a concrete application. We're going to show category A and show that how I can rotate around Mateus's head and shoulder to effortlessly go from one triangle to another. Let's start off with Mateus here on 2 knees. And I'm going to start the ball rolling by just going into a basic front triangle, a mote senkaku. So however we do it, we come in here and we start the action of locking up on our training partner, and we go into a basic triangle like so. Okay, so this is the triangle you guys are all familiar with, the front triangle. Let's say, for example, that Mateus takes his arm and puts it in a secure position in behind and brings his knees forward, and as a result, it's hard for me now to finish the front triangle. It's difficult in this position. Okay, so I make a decision to switch to Hantai Senkaku. So I currently have a front triangle. You can see that just by rotating my body around Mateus's head and shoulders, I get into a situation where I can now make a switch into the Hantai Senkaku. And from here, I go through and lock the figure of 4, and now I have a second potential finish. Now, let's say for whatever reason, this wasn't working. Okay, I went to Hantai, and for whatever reason, the stranglehold's just not there for me. Okay, it's still an easy thing for me to start an action of sweeping my opponent out of the Hantai Senkaku. I can tilt him over and onto his back, and then by simply changing my body's positioning, by shifting my body out to the side, I can now make a switch into Ushiro Senkaku. Okay, in this sense, I've gone through 3 triangles just by rotating around my opponent's head and shoulders. I started with a front triangle. I went into Hantai Senkaku, the opposite-sided triangle. And then I finished with Ushiro Senkaku, the rear triangle. And all I did is go around Mateus's head and shoulders from one triangle to the other. So 3 triangles were employed with a little bit of body movement, rotating around the head and shoulders. And we had a 3-shot combination, which culminated in a finish with Ushiro Senkaku. Now, let's contrast that with, say, for example, category B, lying down. If we have a situation where I have Yoko Senkaku, I place my foot in my training partner's armpit, and I come through like so. Here, I have a classic Yoko Senkaku, okay? And from here, we could potentially finish our training partner. But let's say, for whatever reason, my Yoko Senkaku is inadequate, and Mateus starts turning up and coming up onto his knees inside my side triangle. I can shift my body and switch my legs. And as a result, I can go from Yoko Senkaku to Gyaku Senkaku, the reverse triangle, and make a simple finish. So you see that in category B, whenever I have the side triangle, a simple switching of sides, rotating around my opponent's head and shoulders, means I can easily make a switch to the reverse triangle. This critical theme of learning to switch from one triangle to another is absolutely essential for your development as a triangle expert. It will enable you to quickly and efficiently move from one triangle attack to the next as your opponent goes to resist you. Just bear in mind the fundamental distinction between category A and category B. The triangles of category A are linked to each other, but you cannot transition from them to category B. Category B, the triangles within category B are also linked to each other, and you can go from one to the other, but you can't skip from category B to category A. The configuration of the legs doesn't allow it. So you must learn to take the 5 triangles that we work with and divide them into categories A and B, and see that category A are linked together and can be used in combinations with each other. Category B, same thing, but you can't skip between the 2. Once you get this fundamental insight, you'll know which triangles to mix with each other, which ones mix and which ones don't. You'll see that category A, Mote Senkaku, the front triangle, Ushiro Senkaku, the rear triangle, Hantai Senkaku, the opposite triangle, are all linked, and you can effortlessly go from one to the other merely by rotating around the head and shoulders. Then you have category B, Gyaku Senkaku, the reverse triangle, and Yoko Senkaku, the side triangle, and you can go from one to the other anytime you wish. Once you get that core insight that there's 5 triangles, 2 categories, and you can switch from within the category without a problem, but you can't switch across categories. You'll know which ones to combine, and you'll be able to overcome resistance in the appropriate ways. Now, we're starting to get down into the underlying theory, which is going to power our entire run through the triangle system. We just looked at the idea that we can work with 5 distinct triangles, and these are put into categories A and B. And using this simple categorization, we know which are the appropriate ones to pair with the other so we can hit effective combinations. Now let's go to the second huge underlying theme of this video series. The idea that most triangles are not born fully born. Most triangles begin as what we call a trap triangle. This is where my feet are crossed at the ankles, and they progress from crossed feet to a full figure of 4, where we form the distinctive triangle shape. It is almost never the case when you go hunting for triangles that you land in a flush figure 4 triangle. That rarely happens. It does happen occasionally, but they are a tiny minority of cases. In almost every case, what you begin with is what we call a trap triangle, where you have your legs locked at the ankles around your opponent's head and arm. Then there's a period of adjustment where you have to shift from the trap triangle to the figure 4 and actually strangle somebody. That's where things get interesting. Whether you succeed or fail with your triangle is largely a result of how you manage the transition from the trap triangle to the figure 4. If you manage it well, you're going to finish a lot of people. If you don't, you're in for a lot of frustration. In all 5 cases of the triangle, learning to manage this fundamental transition from trap triangle to figure 4 is one of the absolute most important skills you can develop. We're going to be spending a lot of time on this. I'm just going to demonstrate what I mean by this so you're clear about what I mean. Let's look first at the most common form of triangle in the sport of jiu-jitsu, a mote senkaku, or the front triangle. If we have a training partner here in front of us on 2 knees and we use any generic method to go into a triangle, you can see that initially when we lock up, we have the so-called trap triangle, where Mateus's head and one arm are locked inside my 2 legs, but I do not yet have a stranglehold. Okay, I do have control over his head and arm. Now, the minute we get into a trap triangle, Mateus is now alerted of the danger and he will start going into his defensive responses. There's a bunch of things he can do. We'll be looking at this later on in the video. A lot of people in this situation will begin posturing up. Some people will begin turning to an angle. Other people will get an elbow to the floor on either side. There's a bunch of good things he can do. My ability to shut down his defense and progress from here, where I have control but I don't have a finish, to one where I actually have a figure of 4 locked around my training partner, and now I can actually strangle my opponent or go into arm locks, etc., etc. My ability to manage that transition is the single biggest determinant of whether I succeed or fail with my triangles. Okay, so let's, in terms of terminology, let's understand this as a trap triangle. My ankles are crossed, but I don't yet have what we'll need to actually strangle, which is my shoelaces locked behind the hollow of my knee in the figure of 4 that you guys are all familiar with. Okay, now every triangle, all 5 of them, almost always involves this kind of transition. So for example, if we have Mateus lying down on the floor,
hand away.
Yes. Here I have a different form of triangle, the Yoko Senkaku, and usually even here we'll start off just with ankles crossed. And there has to be a transition period where I go through, turn, and lock the full figure of 4, and I can actually strangle someone. Again, you don't start with that full figure of 4. Typically what we find is we start with crossed ankles, the trap triangle, and we progress to the figure of 4. One of the absolute most important things of this entire video, and one we're spending a lot of time on, is how are you going to manage that transition? If you manage it well, you'll have success. If you manage it poorly, you won't. It's that simple. We'll be spending, as I said, a lot of time on this issue. So be aware of that as we go through the video. These two initial keynote themes. First, the idea of a multiplicity of triangles, 5 distinct triangles into 2 categories, A and B. Okay, learning how to mix triangles correctly so we can work in effective combinations. And secondly, this fundamental distinction between a trap triangle on one hand, which holds my opponent in place, and then a transitional period where I get to the figure 4 triangle, which actually strangles your opponent, or gives you other options that we'll look at later in the video. Once you get that basic understanding, now we're in a position where we can go forward and actually start looking at triangles and attacks. Let's look at the idea of entering into triangles out of scramble situations. A scramble, of course, is always defined as any situation where neither one of the athletes has a controlling grip, which enables them to exert more influence over their opponent's ability to move than the other one does. So let's look at probably the most common scramble situation in the sport of jiu-jitsu, one where the two athletes are on their knees, facing this way, and one athlete has a tight waist grip and the other athlete has an overhook, just like so. So it's his tight waist against my whizzer, okay? This scramble situation occurs all the time in the sport of jiu-jitsu, and typically what we'll find here are a few basic rules of thumb here. If my opponent gets a body lock in this situation, locks in on my body, that can be potentially very bad for me. I can be crunched backwards and put down to my back, okay? If my opponent turns around in front of me and comes into a front headlock situation, that too can be a bad thing. Okay, so I've got to be careful with my head position. I can't let my head come down too far, and then from here he goes front headlock, and you've got a problem. Nor can I allow my body to get too upright. My opponent quickly locks his hands, and from here crunches me backwards. That's obviously a bad thing. But really, most of our problem here comes from the idea that most people don't know how to use their weight effectively here. The way I apply my weight to my opponent here is through my hips, okay? A few words of proviso here. If my opponent does lock his hands, if my head is upright, I make his body lock very, very easy to complete. So our whole thing in these situations is to force him to put his hand on the floor. The way I do that is by putting my hand on the mat, and from here I start a drive in a forwards direction. I never go across into my opponent's body, make a strong body. And from here I'm fighting into his body. What I want to do is to turn and get his weight going forwards, okay? So there's a subtle shift in direction, which I believe you should invest a lot of time in practicing. You're going to have a training partner start in a body lock. You'll have your whizzer in place and your hand on the mat. You're going to experiment with directionality of force. Initially, you're going to drive across, make a strong body, and from here you can see I'm having a hard time pushing across his body. Then all I do is I start the action of turning and driving forward. And you see how Placido immediately has to put his hand on the mat, otherwise he'll face plant. If my opponent doesn't put his hand on the mat, you'll see in situations like this, he will immediately be put down on his back. Okay? The whole idea is application of force. What I want in these situations is to put my hand on my own hip, and then from here, you see I start walking my opponent down to his hip. As you get better and better at this, you can put your opponent under more and more pressure and force their hand down to the floor very easily and very rapidly. The good news is, once you get his hand down to the mat, there's some very, very effective triangle entries you can do. Now, I'm just going to give you one word of advice in this situation. You will often hear people say one of the great cliches of scrambles out of this situation. The idea that you should never step over your training partner's back in these situations, okay? People will often tell you it's a disaster to step over someone's back in this situation. If your concern is top position, that's absolutely true, okay? If my opponent pushes into me now and I get put in a situation where I go on my back, if we were engaged in a sport like wrestling where being put on your back is a bad thing, that's good advice, okay? But you're not. You're in submission wrestling or jiu-jitsu. There's no penalty to being put on your back. So we can use this position very, very well. We'll start with our training partner here in a body lock. We're going to put our hand on the floor. We're going to start the action of rotating towards my hand on the floor. He locks his hands. I never push across his body. I rotate my hips towards my own hand, okay? So I take my knees off the floor. And there's that rotation. Okay. Now, from the situation, I'm going to take both my knees off the mat, and I'm going to come in foot to foot. In one motion, I'm going to do two things at the same time. I'm going to throw my left leg across my training partner's body, and my hand is going to go into my training partner's armpit, just like so. Okay. Now, I can hang my body weight off my training partner so that my right leg becomes weightless. And as a result, we easily go into Sankaku, the triangle. Don't let go of this too early. Okay. You've gone to your back. You've taken a risk here. If I let go too early and he postures up, the risk didn't work out. So it's important we stay in here and lock up. Now, I scoop inside my opponent's legs. He goes to posture up in the usual kind of fashion, and as a result, we get into a good lock for the triangle. So once again, we start off. He's got his tight waist grip in. I've got my whizzer in place. We're seeing now that directionality of force is a super important concept here. I never drive across his hips. I always drive towards my own hand. So I take my knees off the mat and start that drive. From here I go in foot to foot, and then my hand just goes across his body as my leg goes across at the same time. Now it doesn't matter that I go to my back. You're going into a submission hold. Put him down and maintain our grip on our training partner's head. From here, to make the usual turn, my knees wedge in behind his head and neck, and as a result, we get a very strong triangle finish. From another angle, we start off facing in this direction. My opponent's got his body lock in place. We put his hand down on the floor. Now I come up, everything goes over the top on the other side. And as a result, we end up in perfect position to turn the corner and lock up the figure of 4 for the finish. In this fashion, we can take a scramble situation, arguably the most common scramble situation in the sport, my opponent's tight waist versus my whizzer, and into an excellent situation to enter into front triangles. I want to address a topic which is often brought up in when the topic of triangles comes up, especially front triangles. One of the most commonly seen techniques and principles which is taught whenever front triangles are taught is the idea that it's a good thing to pull your opponent's head down once you apply the triangle. You might be surprised by the fact we've gotten through a lot of this video and you've never seen me make reference to the idea of pulling the head down. I want to address that directly now. As a general rule, I'm not always in favor of pulling down on the head. I'm not going to say it's the wrong thing to do. There are times when it is the correct thing to do, but it's not the first thing you should be looking for. Let me explain myself. If I have an opponent directly in front of me and I have him in a front triangle, so often you'll see people make their first gambit straight to the head and pull down on the head. Now, as I said, it's not wrong-headed to do this. It does have one big advantage. It does significantly increase the strangulation power of the lock. And I firmly believe there are times when it's a good thing to do this. But it's not the first thing I coach my athletes to do. Okay? Why? Well, because the moment you commit 2 hands to the head, you're stuck right in front of your opponent. It's very, very hard for me to get an advantageous angle on my opponent at this point. Okay? From here, if he drives forward into me and starts to put pressure on, you end up in situations where you lose the triangle because you were trying to pull down on the head. Okay? If you're very, very flexible, you can hold on longer than most, but at some point, the triangle is going to come undone. You don't really have any advantageous angle in this situation. Moreover, it's relatively simple for my opponent to use his free hand to start clearing hands off the head. And then from here, you're stuck directly in front of people. You might ask, well, are there times when you do think it's the right thing to pull down on someone's head? Yes, I do think there's times when it's a good idea to pull down on the head. What are those times? Well, let's look at a situation, let's move around some, where Placido is in front of me. You know that I strongly favor an approach where we form an angle on our training partner so we can eliminate our opponent's shoulder. My whole spiel is that as we come around the corner and lock up, I want my knee in front of his shoulder so that his shoulder girdle is eliminated from the triangle. And from here I have angle on my opponent. When he drives forward, nothing happens. He just strangles himself. When he goes to posture up, it's so difficult to get away from that initial lock. Okay? So my first goal is to get angle on my opponent. But there's always going to be those times you feel you can't successfully get angle on your opponent. And you've got to go to the next option. And that option is pulling down on the head. Okay? If I cannot eliminate my opponent's shoulder, okay, and his shoulder is inside the lock of my triangle, I have to lock my triangle behind him. The one thing I will ensure is that my shoelaces go into my knee. So often I see people lock triangles where the shoelace goes on the calf muscle. Okay? Let's understand something. It may not look like much of a difference between this and this, but that is the difference between someone tapping in championship level and someone not tapping. Okay? It doesn't. Again, from the sidelines, it doesn't look like much, but when you're the competitors in the arena, it feels like everything. Anytime I have my shoelaces on top of my calf muscle, I'm dramatically lessening the strangle power of my triangle. It's always worth it to make sure your shoelaces go into the pocket of your knee. You have to do this. This has to be a reflex. Once I get a hold of my opponent in these situations, if I ever feel my opponent is directly in front of me and I've locked up like so and I cannot get an angle on him, then my next thing is to physically pull my shoelaces deep into my own knee. Now, you see, as Placido brings his shoulder forward, his shoulder is inside my triangle. I cannot get an angle on him. Okay? This is the time when I'm going to start coaching to pull the head down. I need to do something to make up for the fact that my triangle doesn't really have any advantageous angle to it. So I've got to make up for that lack of angle some other way. And one good way is to lock up over the head. I can use a double palm method. I can use a wrist-to-wrist method. Okay? Both are very good. Let's be sure of a few things, however. When we go to pull on our opponent, he goes to posture up and yank away from me. Let's make sure we don't just pull down on the head. The idea is that I push up with my hamstring. Okay? So there's two things at work here. I don't have my butt down on the floor and I pull him to me. Rather, as he postures up and away, I pull him to me and I bring myself up to him. Okay? You can also do tricks of angle with this. Very often what I will do is I will look to rotate my opponent's head into the cutting cord of my hamstring muscle. If I pull towards his own elbow, not much strangulation pressure there's not much of an increase in my strangulation pressure. What I want to do is rotate his chin into my hamstring. And from here, the cord of your hamstring muscle forms a very effective strangulation. Okay? So when we go to pull down on the head, let's make sure we pull by first turning his chin into the cord of the hamstring. And secondly, don't just pull him to you, pull yourself up to him. The circumstances in which I advocate this are anytime I cannot form an effective angle on my opponent and when his shoulder is inside the lock of my triangle. So let's quickly go over those again. From any one of the various setups that we've looked at to go into a front triangle. Okay? My opponent shoves the shoulder forward and starts to square up to me. So I can't get an angle. I try to reach for his leg, he pulls the leg away from me, etc., etc. Okay? So from here, we're going to lock all the way into the pocket of our knee. Never being satisfied with this kind of thing. Always, we want our shoelaces inside the hollow of our knee. No exceptions. Now, from here, he goes to posture up and pull away on me. From here, we go through and get a hold of our training partner's head. High on the head, never down by the neck. We want the longest lever possible, so we turn his chin into the cord of our hamstring. Our hips come up off the floor, and the strangulation is very strong. These are the circumstances under which I advocate getting a hold of the head and pulling down, but always with the proviso. Turn the chin into the hamstring whenever possible. And don't just be satisfied with pulling his head down, make sure your hips are coming up as well. If you can form an advantageous angle, go with that first. But if you can't, pulling down on the head can be a valuable way to increase the strangle power of your triangles. Now, we just looked at the idea of pulling our opponent's head down and the pros and cons of that. A second piece of advice, which is often coached to athletes, is whenever you have a front triangle, take your opponent's elbow and move it across your chest. Again, you've probably seen me coaching for some period of time in this video, and you didn't really hear me talking much about bringing the elbow across the chest. Again, rather like pulling the head down, this is not something I coach people to do automatically. It can be the right thing to do under certain circumstances, and it can also be the wrong thing to do under other circumstances. As a general rule, I don't believe that strangle pressure is greatly augmented by bringing the elbow across the chest, except under a few circumstances. Most of the time, there's actually advantages to not moving the arm across the chest. Let's have a look at the situation now. From a front triangle, you will often see people say, okay, once you begin the process of locking up the triangle, bring the elbow across the chest, like so, and perform your strangulations in this fashion. There's logic to this. It does make your body strong. It does do a good job of bringing the head and elbow closer together, which is a good thing. However, some of the most effective counters to triangles occur precisely because you brought the elbow across the chest. If Placido brings his elbow all the way across and locks over my knee with two hands, he can now separate my legs and avoid the triangle altogether. In addition, once I start bringing the elbow across the chest, it becomes harder and harder for me to make a switch to a joint lock if the strangulation should fail. In addition, putting the elbow across the chest does nothing to stop my opponent posturing up and moving away from me. So, most of the time, I advocate for my students to keep the elbow here, with my arm dominating the inside position. So even if Placido did try to move his elbow across the chest, he wouldn't physically be able to do it. By keeping my opponent's arm in this position, it means that I always have the prospect of a joint lock follow-up in many different ways, shapes, and forms. And in addition, when I go to form an angle on my training partner, it doesn't matter whether my opponent's arm is across my chest or not. From here, the strangulation is so directly on the neck that it doesn't require that the elbow be brought across. It's simply unnecessary. And it may even be undesirable. If the elbow goes across the chest under these circumstances, it adds nothing to the strangulation pressure and creates an opportunity for my opponent to start bringing the elbow down into a position where my knees cross my own center line, and now we start losing strangling pressure. So generally, I prefer to keep inside position and cover my opponent's elbow. What I like to do here is to form angles which create the strangle pressure. Off those angles, there's no need to bring the arm across. If I'm unable to form an angle and I lock the figure of four, even with the shoulder inside, if my opponent goes to posture up and avoid the strangulation pressure, we just do what we talked about earlier. I turn my training partner's chin into the hamstring and pull down on the head, and the strangulation pressure is very impressive. It's not necessary to bring the elbow across. If my opponent's hand is in the center and I see him posturing up and moving away, etc., one thing I do like hand in the center for is a switch into Jujigatami. Off here, this is a good idea, make a strong body. And from here, this is a good opportunity for us to switch off to an arm lock. So that might be an example where switching the hand across the center is a good thing. As far as strangulation pressure goes, it does add slightly to strangulation pressure if we're directly in front of people. Okay, it's a little bit better for me to pull down on the head with the arm in the center if we're directly in front. However, if we're at an angle, it makes no difference whether the arm is here or here. Okay, when you coach athletes to focus on angle first, the whole issue of elbow across the center becomes a bit of a non-issue. It can actually be detrimental if your opponent is experienced in taking the elbow all the way across and using a hand-over-hand escape to a triangle. So generally I don't get my students to bring the elbow across the center as an opening move. We'll do it under some circumstances, especially if we're interested in switching to a Judigatami armbar. But most of the time we prefer to work with angle as the method of generating strangulation power rather than elbow across the chest. One of the great themes that I always push upon my students is the ability to go from upper body submissions to lower body submissions and vice versa. You have to have an effective game transitioning around the human body if you're going to win at high levels. The triangle is an outstanding opportunity to create strong upper body threats that create predictable defensive reactions which make his lower body vulnerable. As much as possible, we want to create a mental habit that every time we feel a triangle is failing, I go directly into my opponent's lower body. Let's have a look at my favorite methods of doing so. From a situation where my opponent's on two knees, the easiest attacks are generally to the upper body. So from here, we'll start taking our training partner forward and locking up a threatening triangle. As we punch our way into an angle and I see my opponent go to stand up on me, there's a danger now. He's going to begin posturing. You can see that as he punches the shoulder forward and begins posturing up with the head, it's going to get harder and harder for me to successfully complete that triangle. Under these circumstances, I'm always looking from here to get to an angle on my training partner. I'm going to take my hand, let's move around. I'm going to take my right hand and hook here inside my training partner's knee. Don't be below the knee for this particular move. There are other times we do go below the knee, but for this one, we're going to look to hook above the knee. Now, Placido is going to take his thumb and put it inside my knee. This thumb post enables him to start a rotation in the other direction, and as a result, he starts to spin out of my triangle. Now, we're going to take our foot, the outside foot. This is extremely important. I don't want the foot involved on the inside, my right foot, to go in first. I want the outside foot to go in first. So I'm going to pommel my foot in and take a hook here. Why? Why is that so important? If I go in with the inside first and my opponent pushes my knee in this direction, both of my legs are lost and I'm left in a dreadful situation with my arm locked inside his leg and my legs pointing in the wrong direction. So it's important under these circumstances I put this foot in. So when he goes to clear my legs, my left foot keeps me aligned with him. As a result, I can always pull my legs back in. Now we're in X guard. From X guard, as always, we first get our opponent's hands down to the mat. Once his hands go down to the mat, it's an easy thing for us to switch from X guard to reverse X guard. And then as always from here, knees go into chest, and we find ourselves in the perfect position to put him down to the mat and go into our favorite finishing sequences. So once again, we have an opponent in front of us and we use any one of our favorite methods of entering into the triangle. I see my training partner coming up to his feet and starting to pull away from me. He's going to have to bring his feet in to start posturing up. From here, we're going to get a hold of our training partner above the knee. I take my foot and I hook it right there inside his knee. As a result, my left foot protects my right leg. If he tries to throw my right leg by, my left foot holds me in place. And as a result, we can go right away to X guard. From the X guard situation, we tilt him down to the mat. We make a quick switch into reverse X guard and put him down to the floor into a potentially winning position. Let's have a look at it from the other angle. We start off, as we always do, going into Sankaku, the triangle. I catch my training partner here. He starts posting on my knee, and there's a danger now that we're going to lose the triangle. As my knee starts to come off, I'm already thinking about pommeling my outside leg to the inside position. As a result, my left leg protects my right leg. Now we can tilt him down to the mat. We make a quick switch into reverse X guard, and then from here, we find ourselves in a winning position. This is a very effective and very easy way to make quick transitions up and down the body, so that as we lose the upper body submission, we gain the lower body submission. You must train your legs to move in the right fashion. The good news is, whenever you feel you're going to lose a triangle, there's a feeling of anticipation. As you gain an experience, you quickly start to realize there's a certain point in which your triangle is no longer going to be effective. Don't wait for your triangle to become completely undone. Even as you mentally take note your triangle is unlikely to succeed, already be switching your thinking to how am I going to continue my attacks. And the best way to continue your attacks as your opponent postures up and away is to attack the one thing he's going to leave behind, which is his legs. Go into the X guard, go in with the outside leg first, so he can't just throw your legs by and pass. And as a result, you'll climb into X guard, go into reverse X guard, and finish up on a perfect inside heel hook opportunity.